Thank you very, very much for that introduction. And hello and good evening, everybody. It is good to see you, and thank you for coming back. It's been a pleasure and just a happy time for me at a time of rich discussion and conversation on important subjects, the important subject of stewardship, and particularly the pastor's role as a servant and as a steward. That's kind of a funny thing today. You've kept me really busy. That's true, from morning to night. And it reminded me of the little poem that went, Mary had a little lamb. It should have been a sheep, but alas, it joined a Baptist church and died from lack of sleep. Kind of in the day for me. The other strange thing that happened to me was, when I came in tonight, I've been coming in and then coming straight down this side staircase here. And then I kind of went over to the center and looked down. Now, I mentioned the first night that it was sort of an unusual situation to be the speaker, and I think it's probably very biblical, surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, and all that sort of thing. But it's not the norm. And when I stood up there and looked down, there was a gentleman at the front here who had a haircut like mine. And suddenly I thought, they must see the shine. I get teased a lot about that, but in fact, one day with my pastor, who has a very thick head of hair, I got up and he was invited me to speak in the church, and I said a little poem that goes, God is just, and God is fair. God gives some brains, and others hair. Well, Paul is a rather creative person himself, so the next week he had a poem for me. And I was his executive minister at that moment, and his poem went, so you're the chief exec, well, what the heck? You can keep your brains. I really don't care. As long as Sybil can run her fingers through my hair. That's probably not a bad introduction to what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is to focus on the issue of integrity, the integrity of the steward, and to look at the important issues of integrity in pastoral ministry, integrity in the leadership of Christ Church. Before jumping right into the middle of this, I kind of want to circle it for a minute and spend probably a longer time on introduction than ordinarily I would. I want to begin by telling you that I stand in awe of those of you who are in pastoral roles in the church at this moment in history. I stand in awe at the spiritual maturity that it takes to be a minister of the Church of Jesus Christ in this time. And whatever I say tonight, in terms of the need for high standards of integrity and moral behavior on behalf of church leadership, I want you to know at the beginning how much I admire and how important I believe the work that you are doing, how important that work really is. It's very easy to criticize, and it's very easy to point fingers. And the vast majority of the servants of Jesus Christ, in my belief, are people who have a very deep sense of call and who are seeking as best they can to serve their master. And so please know of my deep admiration and of my appreciation for your work and for your ministry. I think in many ways it's a very strange time for ministry. Because on the one hand, it is very difficult. It's not an easy moment. It's not a really spiritual age. It's an incredibly secular age. And to be sign and symbol of the cross, as we said last night, in the midst of a secular age is not an easy thing to do. And yet, there is a very positive side to it. You can actually say that it is tough and terrific all at the same moment. It is fantastic and frustrating all at the same moment. It is exhilarating and exasperating all at the same moment. It's a time in which I believe as never before, those who have leadership roles in the church are being tested and tried, and yet it is also a moment, I think, of unusual opportunity as people discover that the God that the culture is offering cannot meet their needs. And there is an inherent quest in the human heart for what Jesus Christ has to offer. And we are the servant shepherds, the servant stewards who are able to share that good news with them. One other word, just kind of in circling the subject. Whenever you talk about the moral imperative, the need for high integrity in the pastoral ministry, which is there and which we're going to talk about tonight, I think also it needs at least to be said that many of our churches need also to look at the way churches treat their pastors. And that, in fact, one of the things that we need to be encouraging amongst our stewards, amongst our churches, is that they be better stewards of the leaders of Christ's church than at many times the church may be. Anyone who deals with churches, and I've been doing it now for many years, knows that sadly we live in a time when one is almost tempted to say more than many, almost most of our churches face deep conflict. And it's a time when the church seems unable to get its act together in order to present the gospel to the world. And in a situation like this, often ministers are caught in a very difficult position. And talking about the importance of integrity in that situation, you have got to at least say that we need to reflect something about the health of our churches and the need for the church itself to be a good steward of its leadership. I could be here all night, and you could be here all night sharing stories with me about those kinds of situations. But one that I would share is a story of having visited a friend whose son, approximately 6 months before our visit, had committed suicide. And the second I stepped into the room with my friend, I'd been in another part of the country, and this was the first time that we had met, I knew something was deeply, deeply wrong, even beyond the natural and normal grief which would have been the expression of what had happened to his son. And I could tell it in an incredible anger towards the church. This was not the kind of a guy that I would ordinarily expect to see such anger towards the church. And as the evening went on, I eventually, quietly asked him, "What's wrong?" And he went on to tell me that in the 6 months since his son's suicide, and he was an usher and a member of a major board at the church, that nobody from the church had called him. That actually it was a divorce situation, and the funeral had been carried by the church to which the mother attended. Nobody in the congregation called the father. Nobody in his church. Now, it happened to be, relax just a little, it wasn't a Baptist church. And I knew the executive director of the other denomination very well. I mean, I thought, if that were to happen to one of our churches, I'd want to know about it. I want to try at least to see if somebody couldn't get there and visit this person. And so I called the other executive, and he said, "I can't believe that. It would never happen." He said, "I'll check it." 2 or 3 weeks later, telephone call comes through, and he said, I did check it. And he said, it's true. But he said, what was happening was that the church was in the midst of a big conflict and fight. Half the congregation was trying to get rid of the minister. The other half was trying to hang on to the minister. Now listen to the words. And somehow, Ralph slipped through the cracks. It's a time when the church has got to take its energy and steward its energy to mission and to ministry, and to stop using its energy in fighting with itself. And it's a major, major problem. And seminaries, and regional staff, and pastoral associations, and lay associations, we need to be focusing our attention on helping the church get past its moments of squabbling and get into the mission and ministry to which Christ has called it. So they're in terms of facing integrity. I think it is important for us to look at that whole issue of the health of the whole church, and to say that as ministers live out their lives, that those lives are lived out often in a very conflicted institution, which makes some of the issues that it faces, and some of the issues that the minister faces, very difficult. Actually, I want to again try to root what I have to say tonight in the Bible, and to come at it perhaps from a little different perspective. Most often when we talk about these issues, we go to the pastoral epistles, where there is a great deal of important information about the expected behavior of the leaders of the church. You're familiar with those passages of Scripture, but they're not going to be the basis of what I want to say tonight. I want to take you to what may at first seem like an unusual place. And that unusual place is the 14th chapter of the Gospel of John. And I want to remind you of the remarkable words of Jesus. Words that sometimes we tend to slide by rather quickly. The word in which Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Now, that's a powerfully important statement in our time. One can say that Jesus is the way in a world that's lost its way. That Jesus is the truth in a world that's lost its integrity. That Jesus is the life in a world that seems bent on choosing death. But the focus tonight, I want to be on the second of those proclamations. What it means when Jesus says, I am the truth. For it seems to me that in that declaration of Jesus as the truth, we have the roots of the required integrity of ministry. That ministry is a reflection of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, needs to be filled with that integrity that is inherent in Jesus. I've often been very, very thankful for that word, that Jesus is the truth. And especially, say, in the context of a university setting. If Jesus is the truth, then we don't ever have to be afraid of truth, no matter where it's found. It doesn't matter what discipline. It doesn't matter in what area of inquiry. If it is the truth, ultimately understood, it is in line with Jesus. And I've also been so thankful for this word. Because as we live our lives in ministry, we need to reflect that basic integrity of what it means to be a follower of the one who is known as the truth. It's interesting that in the United States at this moment, Stephen Carter has become an author who is very widely read. Stephen Carter is an Episcopalian, a professor at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. His most recent book is just simply called Integrity. And he reports that when he has gone to universities around the country to speak on the subject of integrity, that not only have the auditoriums been filled, but that at times simply the introduction of the subject brings a round of applause. We are living in a world that is on that intense a quest for what integrity means. I must admit I've thought a lot about the fact that coming from the United States at this moment, with what is going on in the American political system at this time, does set this evening for me in an important context. But we are beginning to ask very basic questions about what is integrity? And what does the integrity of leadership mean? And certainly, what does integrity of leadership within the church mean? In his book, Stephen Carter identifies integrity with basically three different statements. The first is that integrity is the discerning of what is right and what is wrong. Secondly, it is acting on what you have discovered, even at personal cost or extreme inconvenience. And thirdly, it is saying openly what you have decided is right and wrong, and what you intend to do to live out your understanding about what is right and wrong. When I read that, I found myself writing in the margins of the book, know it, do it, and proclaim it. Know what is right and what is wrong. Do what is right and what is wrong. And proclaim what is right and what is wrong. Fits neatly into a pattern that can be very helpful in mission and in ministry. Tonight I want to just take a few minutes to look at three different areas of ministry in relationship to an understanding of integrity. And to ask questions about what does it mean to have integrity as stewards of Christ Church in the areas of our professional lives, in the areas of our moral lives, and in the areas of our spiritual lives. You can rest a little easier. There are only 3 points tonight and not 12. And that should be to your advantage. Rather than ticking off a series of things that pastors need to do in order to live with integrity in their professional lives, I want to pick on one or two things and kind of focus on those. And these reflections don't come so much from a scholar who has studied them nearly as much as from a churchman who has observed them and who has seen them at work. I have a particular passion about talking about one area of what it means to be a professional in ministry, and that is the way that a pastor or a church leader, professional church leader of any kind, associate pastor, director of Christian education, whatever that mission or ministry may be, how that person relates to the mission system. See, I am a very strange anomaly at this moment because I believe deeply in the ministry of what I call mission systems. Those are commonly referred to as denominations. I think denomination miscommunicates what the mission system is all about and what you are a part of as a part of the broader Canadian Baptist Fellowship, and particularly as a part of the Convention of the Maritime Provinces of Labrador and Newfoundland. You are a part of a mission system. When we talk about denominations, we think about headquarters and all this kind of stuff. I think that misses the point. The reality is that the call of Jesus Christ to a pastor and to a local congregation is a call that is clearly laid out in Acts 1:8. You shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. That is the mission of every single church. And it is a mission that no church can provide for itself. In order to complete that mission, a church needs other churches. I don't think there is such a thing as the independent church. I think every church is dependent on other churches. And those of us who are Convention Baptists have committed ourselves to a mission system. And that mission system is a system which helps us to be able to work through our Acts 1:8 commission. And I think in the relationship of pastors and churches at this moment in history, it is professionally very important to have integrity. That the pastor of the local congregation is at one with the broader mission system. I do not mean that you agree with everything that is done everywhere. But I do mean that you're a part of that you cooperate with it. There are associations. They need the support of local churches. Local churches need each other. Associations have always been the basis of our work. And when pastors or leaders move in and act as lone rangers, act as if they are there by themselves, begin to take the monies that have been committed to the mission of Christ Church around the world, so that you have missionaries around the world who are dependent upon the intended support of that local church, and begin to move that support around and to cut it back so that the total mission of Canadian Baptists around the world is badly hurt by the action of that church and that church and that church. I think we have a kind of a lack of integrity in the life of the pastor in relationship to the denomination. You have lots of opportunity to change it. You can work with others to bring about changes that you think are important. But I think it is so very important for the pastor to be committed to that basic mission system. I would go even a step further. I think in many ways it is a form of stealing for a pastor to lead a congregation out of fellowship. I believe that because of this. Nobody has to stay a Canadian Baptist. If I were in the States, the language would flow more easily for me. I'd say American Baptist. And that's kind of the language I'm more used to. Nobody has to stay with us. Anybody's free to leave, go to any denomination they want, or go out and start their own church if they want. But to move into a congregation that has covenanted to support missionaries around the world, to develop a national ministry throughout the country, to work within a region or within an association, and to take that and to just move that away from its base and from its root, I believe it is an act of stealing. I'd encourage the person to leave any time they want. But to betray the commitment of that church to that mission system, I believe, is lacking in integrity. Let's move to another area. And you can all ask me questions about this later. I feel very strongly about that point. I feel very strongly about that. Second area in which there needs to be that basic integrity that we're talking about is in the moral behavior of pastoral and lay leadership. And again, let me preface this by saying it is true that many times pastoral leadership has failed in moral standards. It is also true that has happened with lay leadership. I think it's important to cast the net a little wider than simply focusing upon pastoral leaders. I think we need to begin in this area with a number of basic confessions which can be very uncomfortable for us to make. One is the confession that this is a much bigger problem than we pretend that it is, and that its reality is much further realized than we most often tend to surmise. We often will point at others and we'll talk about what's happened with the televangelists, talk about what's happened within the Roman Catholic Church. But the reality is that this is a Baptist problem too. That at every level of Baptist life, we have found the breaking of sexual, moral behavior codes by leaders, both lay and professional. I think we also need to confess that one of the difficulties for many pastors in this relationship is that, I've often thought of this, the pastor really in many ways has two families. The pastor has a family at home, but the pastor also has a family at the church. And we really often use that language. And very often, the marks and the lines between those two families can so very easily be blurred. And one of the things I think churches need to do to help ministers at this point is to be understanding of the need for a pastor to spend priority time and to be able to give the attention and the affection that is needed to his or to her family. And that we begin to see the two families not so much in competition, but to recognize that unless the pastor is able to find the strength and the nurture in his own family, he will not be able to bring that leadership strength to the church family. And that, in fact, the church family is, in a sense, dependent upon the pastor's family to be able to provide a nurture, encouragement, support, and fulfillment in life that the church itself can never be able to fulfill. We need also, in thinking about sexual immorality within the life of pastoral leadership, to confess that that is not the only kind of compulsive behavior which is made manifest within the life of the church. In my role as an executive minister, I have dealt with alcoholics in pastoral ministry, dealt with people who faced drug problems within pastoral ministry, dealt, unfortunately, many times with people who were guilty of sexual abuse or of sexual harassment within ministry. And so we need to confess that and to say that's real. That is a problem that we need to face. And before the Lord, we confess it and we want to begin to work at it. Nothing brings greater devastation. Nothing brings greater devastation to a church than when there is leadership failure at this particular point. By the way, I want to say that tonight I am not going to be restating a lot of the material, the extraordinarily good material, which Rick Thomas shared with us the other morning. And I would certainly suggest that if you were not at that lecture, that you have a conversation with Rick and get the background for it. He spent the entire time of that lecture focusing on this issue and did it in a very helpful and a very, very significant way. So this is one of many problems I'm going to be sort of working on and pointing to tonight. But I do hope that you will pay attention to what Rick said. His statistics and his suggestions, I think, were very, very powerful. I guess as I look at this, one of the issues, and I'm coming tonight more from just personal reflections of a pastor who has tried to live through this, and what some of the learnings within my own family have been, in terms of how we can support and love one another, and how in a way we can, this may sound like a strange word, but affair-proof our relationship. Develop a relationship that won't lend itself to the temptations which can easily be found around every corner. I need to begin by saying I think sometimes ministers must be very difficult people to be married to. I'm serious. That's not a joke. I'm very serious about that. I think we must be very difficult to be married to. I think that when I was younger, I didn't think this. I mean, I was the answer to the whole world's problems, and how could anybody have any trouble being married to somebody? And I think that's the problem. I think ministers, by and large, have very strong egos. You probably wouldn't be moved to a call, the kind of public call that we are moved to, if there weren't a really strong sense of ego within us. And that can be used by God in ministry. It's not a bad thing. But I think sometimes it must be a very, very difficult thing within the marriage situation. I think when we're married, one of the problems, of course, is workaholism. We get so caught up in our work. We end up often working with members of the opposite sex, and many times we work in close proximity, and that is a particular danger. If I have an example in all of this, of the path that I want to follow, it's that of Billy Graham, whom I believe has been an exemplary model of this kind of behavior. Do you know that over the years, when Billy Graham travels the world, obviously, but you know that he would never go into a motel room until, first of all, one of his colleagues went in to make sure that there was no one there? When I heard him tell that, he quoted the scriptural verse about refraining from every appearance of evil. And he was that cautious. I found over the years, personally, that some of my behaviors really have changed because of that. I nowadays try not to be in a room alone with a woman. In the offices in Valley Forge, I always leave my door open. I try hard not to find myself in a situation where I'm driving the car alone with a woman. Let there be someone else there. Take that extra step of precaution. Just a moment there can absolutely destroy ministry. It can destroy people who have put their faith and their trust in you. And I think we need to be very, very cautious and walk the extra mile to make sure that we leave no appearance of evil. That sometimes may be difficult, and it sometimes may be awkward, but I really do believe that it is wise behavior. We live in a time when rumor and innuendo can be picked up from the slightest, and sometimes from unfounded causes. And you just don't give that chance to happen if you're careful. I used to be a hugger. Oh, did I used to be a hugger? I'm an extrovert. When I came, I sometimes look back and feel sorry for those people in the first churches I served. I mean, I love them. I did. I cared for them, and my natural reaction was, and I'm a big guy, was just to reach out and sort of to hug people. I have really learned not to do that. I've learned that that's not a wise pattern of behavior. I've tried to learn to let the other person indicate the mode of greeting that we would have. And if the other person give them the chance to offer the hand. And if the other person offer a hug, which will happen from time to time, I've practiced what is known as the A-frame hug. And sounds silly, but I'm serious. It is a form of greeting that is far less open to misunderstanding than a warm, open kind of an embrace. I'm saying this because I think we have to be careful about these kinds of things. I also am talking to people. I recognize that within ministry, that ministry offers an opportunity for persons who may be predators. That's true. The ministry gives to a predator a lot of opportunities. No other profession is as welcome in people's homes. I mean, nobody else can literally walk up to almost anyone in the congregation's door, knock on the door, and expect the person to open the door to say, come in. Anybody else knocks on that door, and there's going to be a conversation out here well before that invitation is there. And I'm recognizing the reality of the predator, the person who makes a constant practice of abusing people, using the power of the office in order to abuse people. But what I'm speaking to tonight, I hope, more is to the pastor who might be in a situation where this would not be the normal concurrence, but where it could happen. And I'm trying to say at this point, don't do it. It isn't worth it. It isn't worth it for what it can do to your spouse. It is not worth it for what it can do to your children. It is not worth it for what it can do to your church. It is not worth it for what it can do to your soul, and it is not worth it for what it can do to your God. A little song that they sing that says, how can it be wrong when it feels so good? Well, let me tell you, it can be wrong. And it is wrong. And if integrity is first of all determining what is right or wrong, determine that now. And if integrity is secondly acting on what is right and wrong, act on that now. And if it is publicly saying it, say that now. One of the things that in affair-proofing a marriage in a pastorate that I think can be very important is letting people know you love your spouse. They say, you've got an opportunity to do that. And I don't mean every Sunday. And I don't mean in the middle of the announcements. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about, you have control of a lot of discourse. And in your own way with integrity, let people know that your spouse is the love of your life and is your best friend. That kind of a public declaration is really helpful because it sends out a signal. I'm not interested in anything or anyone else. I found also that in terms of our relationship, one of the most important things was for us to celebrate within the family certain very important events that became ours. Of course, we celebrated Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, but there are other events. There's a day in April when we celebrate something that happened more than 20 years ago. It was a day when Joan had been discovered to have had breast cancer and had a radical mastectomy. Now, it was 20 years later. And inside our family, that's a very important celebration day. We thank God so for the answer to prayers in giving her these years of life and in healing. Now, that's not necessarily something that we talk to a lot of other people about. I'm doing it here tonight only because I'm talking about this subject. But our kids will phone. The family gathers, and that's a very, very important moment. You need your own individual, you need those things that bind you together. You need to celebrate them. We just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary, and it was just to illustrate this. We both were members of a young people's group in northern Alberta. And my dad was the minister there, and not a lot of stuff happens in Grand Prairie, Alberta. I mean, probably more stuff happens now than used to, but back in those days, there wasn't very much. And there was a traveling group that came through that had all these rides and kind of a traveling carnival thing. And the kids from the church went down. I never liked, Ferris wheels or rockets or any of that sort of stuff. And it turned out Joan didn't either. And we'd never done anything together before. But that night, I said to her, would you like to go on the merry-go-round? And she said yes. It was the first thing we ever did together. Well, we've kind of rediscovered that. It's been a beautiful thing for us. didn't do this for a number of years early in our marriage, but lately we celebrate every anniversary by going to a carousel. And on our 40th, we had our friends and our family. And we all gathered at a big carousel in Alaska, Pennsylvania, and we spent probably the better part of a couple of hours riding the carousel, just loving it. And our grandkids had a ball. And it was a wonderful, wonderful moment, because I think it was a way of celebrating our love. And I encourage you, in affair-proofing your marriage, learn to celebrate each other. Learn to appreciate each other. Learn to affirm each other. And internally, within your relationship, I think that becomes very, very important. That plus keeping from any possible sense or reflection of what is evil. I want to talk about one other area before I finish tonight, and that is one of my tasks is to share with new executive ministers of the American Baptist family. And it's on this kind of an issue. I think it's very important that everyone be confronted with the reality of the importance of appropriate behavior. And they kind of laugh at me because they've got this speech of mine down kind of pat now because I've given it so many times. But there really are sort of 3 or 4 points that I try to make with ministers all the time. Point number 1, and I think this is very biblical, keep a guard on your lips. Be careful what you say. You can very easily hurt, destroy, spread rumor. Keep a guard on your lips. Number 2 is keep your buttons buttoned. And number 3, and I'm very serious, keep your zippers zipped. And number 4, keep your fingers out of the till. Now, that's a pretty short sermon. But those are important elements in terms of leading in Christ's church. Watch what you say. Keep your behavior beyond reproach. And be careful how you handle money. Any one of those can be such a destructive force. It can destroy the inherent integrity we've tried to establish is to be the mark of those who follow the one who is the truth. Now, my 3rd point is to share a little bit about spiritual integrity. I talked about professional integrity and a little bit about moral or ethical integrity, and I want to talk to you a little bit about spiritual integrity because I think it's important for us to make sure that there is powerful integrity in our relationship with God and in our relationship as it reaches out to others. And the way I'd like to do this one is to ask you a series of questions and just kind of move through them and think about issues around spiritual integrity as we express these questions. I'm going to go for, this is a little bit like they do sometimes on television. I'm going from 10 to 1 rather than from 1 to 10. But the 10th question I'd like to ask you is there a gulf? I don't want to turn that. I'm asking myself this question. Is there a gulf fixed between my public persona and what is occurring in the depth of my soul? Am I real? Over a number of years, we've been saying that when people come to church, they're asking the question, is there a word from God? I think that question is changing. I really do. I think when people come to church, the question that they are asking is this: do you know God? And if you know God, can you help me find God? there is an incredible quest for God that's going on all around. People don't care whether you can talk about God. People don't care whether you can talk about what God did in the past. Many secular people today want to know, do you know God? Is there a gulf between your public persona and what's going on in your heart of hearts? Do you pretend? Do I pretend that my devotional life is more active than it actually is? Is there in public an honest reflection of what I'm doing in private? That's an important question. No one can minister in our time without deep spiritual resources. And no one can have deep spiritual resources without spending time with God. And that's why it is so important not to pretend. I think maybe the most important word in that question is the word pretend. Because the world that we live in has a way of detecting pretense and hating it. Is there integrity between my private and my public life? Another question is, am I a good steward of the power of my pastoral office? You know there is power in the pastoral office. It may not be as great as it once was, but within the community of faith, there is power in that office. You have the ability to lead. You have the ability to shape and to mold and to direct. And are you using that power wisely? And are you using it well? Now, the next question is, am I a steward of the weakness of the pastoral office? Because there also is a kind of a weakness or a brokenness at this moment. The church is no longer the great, strong institution. Many people look at the church as weak and broken, forgetting that it is weak and broken vessels that the power of the resurrection is able to restore. But do I handle that weakness well? This was one I often had trouble with because my ego was so big. I used to always want everything big and perfect and all that sort of thing. And sometimes a more humble approach is an approach that will bring a more thoughtful response. Am I really honest about the way I use Baptist polity, and especially the Baptist polity of soul freedom and the autonomy of the local church? There's been a lot of abuse, as I said earlier, about the autonomy of the local church. In fact, in American Baptist circles these days, we've changed that language a little. And we talk together about the local church as being interdependent and autonomous. To say that there is a freedom within the local church, and certainly it is autonomous in one sense, but it is also interdependent. And am I using that freedom creatively? Am I using that freedom to God's glory? How far will I go to support the ministry of other pastors? And this is a tough one for pastoral leadership sometimes to face. We do have a tendency to be lone rangers. But how supportive? How willing am I to allow others freedom to go some different paths, to support them in times of difficulty, to be with them in times of anguish? I worry lest the whole association principle, which I think is foundational to Baptist life, gets withered away by our independence. And I think that integrity calls us to support one another in ministry. When someone comes to us and begins to criticize another pastor, tell us what's wrong with that other pastor? Are we, oh yeah, I know, and sort of affirming of that? Or is there a kind of a reserve which says, well, I don't know, I need to check that out, or I need to think that through, or I know that person? We get that a lot in denominational work. Many of our leaders are highly criticized. As I go around the country sometimes, people will tell me these terrible things about colleagues of mine. And I've found that the way that I must respond is to say something like this. Let me be honest with you. I have worked with him or with her for nearly a decade. And what you're describing to me is not my experience as to who that is. It's a way of supporting those who are colleagues in ministry and not allowing negative talk to pull them down. Number 3 is a real tough one. Do I lie when I preach? Do I tell the truth? I guess the reason I ask that is that you've heard in me a person who uses a lot of illustrations. And one of the great temptations in my ministry, especially when I was young, was to shape them. And sometimes to shape them beyond reality. So that if you'd been there, you wouldn't really have seen what I said. And over the years, this has been one point at which my wife has been extraordinarily helpful to me. Because as we've talked about preaching and about ministry, she is a person who has had a high desire for the truth. Not for secrets, not to hide things, but to speak the truth. To speak the truth with love. Probably if there was a theme text for Jonah's life, that would be it. And her help in that point has helped me to go out of my way to make sure that I don't mislead people with my stories. And that the story, if I tell it, if you were there, you would have seen by far the most of it. But if you're illustrating eternal truth, don't you have to tell the truth? Don't you have to say what was? Don't you have to portray it as it happened? Do I consistently ask others in public to do what I am not willing to do in private? Is my ministry characterized by duplicity or by integrity? You know, it's interesting. Somebody may come in, violate all of those rules, live a life without very much integrity, and build a huge, big church, and draw all kinds of people. But you know what? It won't last. It won't last. It is not built on the truth. And we heard from John 14 that I am the truth. And I don't know about you, but I want more than anything else in my life that when it's done, which is not that far down the road, that my ministry, my life, will have reflected with integrity the one who is the way, the one who is the truth, the one who is the life. I guess another way of saying all of this in conclusion is to say, well, we've really been talking about God's will. What is God's will for my life? I was in a search committee one night when a layperson powerfully prayed, oh God, your will, nothing more, nothing less, and nothing else. In a way, that's all I've been talking about all night. God's will and the activity of our lives, nothing more, nothing less, and nothing else. And then I have a friend. His name is Dr. Shetty, and he is the executive minister of the Los Angeles Baptist Mission. He's from India. He's from Calcutta. And on several occasions, he met with Mother Teresa. And on one of those occasions, they had lots of opportunity for conversation. And in the midst of that conversation, Sam, Chetty, said to Mother Teresa, Mother Teresa, how do you know God's will in your life? Mother Teresa responded, that's a typically American question. And then she looked at him and she said, don't you understand? You are God's will. He created you. He formed you. He has a beautiful dream for your ministry. With integrity, let's reach for that. Well, I've ended each night with a story, so let me try one more. Hey, I got 3 points, one longer than I thought it would. I'm sorry. It was a hot afternoon. Oh, it was hot. It was the ordination of a new pastor. His name was Kelly Littlejohn, African American. Union Baptist Church, Hartford, Connecticut. Hot. No air conditioning. We were all gowned. In the tradition of ordination services within the African American community, the first hour ticked by, and the second hour ticked by, and it was hot, and there was no air conditioning. It was a wonderful service, and Kelly was a dear friend, and a young man that I knew was going to make a great minister, and one of the patriarchs of the African American community in Hartford was going to give the charge to the candidates. It was the last thing on the program. And now we're into that program for 2.5 hours. And Earl gets up to speak. And he has the certificate of ordination for young Kelly Littlejohn. And he holds it up. And it was very, very nice sheet of paper, beautiful certificate. And he sort of touched it. And then he turned to Kelly. And he said, Kelly, here is your certificate of ordination. Keep it clean. And that's what I've been admonishing you. By your life, keep the ordination that the Church of Jesus Christ has given you.